Hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you. As you know, I try and find the best of the best every week, and this week is no exception. Somebody here owns 4 companies and is president of the 5th. So, Paul Neuberger, how are you today?
I am well, Dave. Thanks for having me on your program, my friend. I really appreciate it.
No worries. You'll be able to give out all the information you want. I wanted to learn a bunch more about cold calling. I consider you the cold calling coach, and you're president and CEO of the Cold Call Coach. You and I have shared stages in the past, and so never really was able to unpack information and wanted to learn more about you. So why don't you go ahead and jump in, Paul, and let us know, because I'm sure you've heard cold calling's dead, right? So I want to hear your version of why it's not, because I totally am in your camp, but I want you to unpack that for our listeners.
I was going to say, if you want to get my blood pressure elevated in the beginning of this interview, say that again, Dave.
Here you go. Yeah, cold calling is dead, Paul. Okay.
Boy, yeah. You're lucky this is virtual, man. We might have. Yeah. I mean, again, the only people that believe cold calling is dead are the people that profit from cold calling being dead, or the people that don't believe you're able to solve a hard problem. Now, personally, for me, I believe that people listening to this are capable of doing something difficult. You are talented enough. You are skilled enough. You are good enough. And it's certainly within your grasp to master cold calling. I mean, if it was easy, everybody would do it.
Right.
I really believe it's the hard in life that makes life good.
Sure.
It's hard to be a good public speaker. Well, then if you become a good public speaker, doesn't that give you a good competitive advantage? If
Sure.
cold calling is hard, if you can master something that's hard, doesn't that give you staying power? I would argue yes. And because it's hard, that's why you should run after it. I'll make it quick, but I believe right now is the greatest time in the history of the world to cold call, going through this pandemic and this economic disruption that we're going through. And I know people listening to this might say, what? Is this nuts? We've got millions of people unemployed. We've had hundreds of thousands of people that have died. Businesses have shut down. How insensitive is this guy? Well, I'll tell you why I believe now is the greatest time in the history of sales to cold call. Let's say you have every salesperson as part of a pie. So we're all a part of that pie. Anybody that would do any kind of cold calling is part of that whole. You have about 60 to 65%. This is all anecdotal information, Dave. I haven't done like an exhaustive study on this, but you have about 60 to 65% of salespeople that have stopped cold calling because they don't want to come across as insensitive. They don't want to come across as tone deaf. There's too much disruption going on.
Sure.
Just 65% of the competition is gone. So now we're left with 35% of the pie. So the odds are in our favor just by virtue of the pie being a little bit smaller. Of that 35% of the pie, approximately 33.5% hasn't changed. They're cold calling the same way they always have, the salesy way, the selfish way, hey, I want to talk to you about our company, and they're coming across as tone deaf. They're coming across as disconnected with reality, so they're getting chopped to bits in their cold calls, which leaves 1.5% of the pie left. That 1.5% of the pie is in the arena making cold calls, but they've modified their approach. They've modified their approach to be sensitive to what's going on. And I think if you're serious about cold calling, you got to do the same. And there's a lot of things you can do to be a highly effective cold caller.
Holy cow, that's a lot of good information. So I'm writing as fast as I can. So thank you for sharing that with us. So, and I sit on a lot of these virtual calls, where there's networking going on and people are trying desperately to find the missing link, so to speak. And I'm not hearing anybody coming up with, when I tell people just pick up the phone and start dialing, whatever that action is, it's like you get such resistance. So when you encounter somebody, Paul, that is resistant to cold calling, and you have a choice of saying, fine, leave it, or you want to challenge them, how do you do that? How do you encourage people to be part of that 1.5%, so to speak, that will cold call and modify their approach?
Yeah, it's a good question, Dave. It's really all about showing them a better way. And what you can do is you can encourage until you're blue in the face. You can appeal to somebody's logical brain until you're blue in the face, but it's really not going to get you anywhere. So what you got to do is you got to show them a way. You have to blaze the trail. You have to show them the path,
Okay.
prove that it works. And I think once people see, yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, that is a little bit easier. Yeah, I like how that feels. Wow, that works 6 times in 7 tries. Okay, I'm in. So
Sure.
you show them a better way. And I think that's one of the things that I'm very good at, very humbly speaking, if I may. And part of the reason we do that is we really focus on 3 main pillars when it comes to cold call success. Now, again, I've got training programs that are between 12 and 20 hours. So I'm really putting a lot into a short amount of time here.
Sure. Sure.
But number one, and Dave, if I say anything during the duration of this bit that you disagree with, please do let me know. You know a thing or two about sales as well.
Sure.
First and foremost, I believe people buy people first. People don't buy companies first, organizations first, professional value adds first. Yet when you listen to people's cold call scripts, they all sound something like this. Good afternoon, Dave. My name is Paul Neuberger, founder of the Cold Call Coach. Just want to see if you're happy with your current cold call success rate.
Oh my gosh. You've done that a time or two, huh?
I've done that a time or two, yeah, with the extra emphasis just for you, Melinda.
Thanks, man.
But the thing that's interesting, though, is right off the bat, I just got one sentence out of the script,
Yep.
and just about everybody's hanging up. Just about everybody's tuning out. Just about everybody's going, hey, vey, why did I pick up this call?
Right.
Because what did I do in that call? I led with my company. I led with my services. I left with my value add. I was all professional Paul versus personal Paul. And we teach our clients to sell personal you first, so it doesn't sound like a sleazy sales call.
Sure.
2, to answer your question, number 2, as I already kind of alluded to, people are not logical buyers. People are emotional buyers. They use logic to justify an emotional purchase.
Yep.
For instance, I'm on a diet, let's say. I go a week, I eat well, I eat like a rabbit, all that stuff that my wife's feeding me. And then it's Sunday, the Packers are on. Yay. I have 2 pizza pies. Okay, I led into my emotion there, but now my logical brain's kicking in. Yeah, well, I ate good all week. Yeah, I haven't had pizza in 3 weeks. I'm okay. People use logic to justify an emotional response, but here's what I want your listeners to really take to heart, Dave. People will not always remember what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel
Right.
when you said it. When you cold call, are you hitting your prospects at a deep emotive level? When you cold call, are you making them feel a certain way? Are you giving them an experience? Are you elevating their mood? Are you piquing curiosity? And if not, no wonder you're stuck in neutral. So we teach our clients how to sell on emotion first rather than logic. And lastly, what makes cold calling so insanely difficult is of the people that do it, everybody sounds the same. Every greeting sounds the same. Every first few sentences sound the same. Every human being sounds the same based on what they say and how they say it. As soon as somebody starts going through their introduction, that flip switches in somebody's brain. Oh, it's a sales call again. Well, what if you could position the call different? What if you could do it in a different order? What if you could start a call in a different way? What if you could just totally transfer the entire paradigm and separate yourself from everybody else based on the talk tracks that you use? That's another thing that we teach. So we make our clients, we give them the ability to differentiate themselves instantaneously. This sounds different. This feels different. If it doesn't look like a duck, quack like a duck, brother, it's probably not a duck. Long answer to your question, but that's how we get our clients to embrace cold calling. We show them how to do it by selling on emotion, by showing them the people buy people first, and by showing them a different order and combination of the script to make sure that they can differentiate themselves and separate themselves from every other person on planet Earth.
Awesome. Okay, so I want to challenge one of those. Can I?
By all means, that's why I'm here.
Cool. Awesome. Okay. So we do a ton of work on, personality profiling. We use DISC, extensively in my coaching practice. And so there's actually and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, because when we have interviewed people that are a certain type of personality, they'll tell you that if you don't have emotion when you're selling, if you don't get excited about it, I'm not going to get excited about it, right? So you have that group, But also, Paul, there's the group of people, and I'm going to use the word engineer just for fun, but you kind of get that, that logic mentality who they aren't built for emotion. They don't make their decisions emotionally, they make them intellectually, kind of like you alluded to. How do you work with them if I'm on a call, I'm making a cold call to you and I want to get past you, to you, whatever, and I use emotion to get into your psyche, so to speak, get into your, brain. But the person that you are not interested in that, how do we work that in? Because there's a lot of people that don't buy with emotion. How do you encourage them to use that, push that button that they're not used to pushing, I guess?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, when I talk about buying on emotion, I'm not necessarily talking about giving a sob story or painting a vivid picture of a traumatic experience you went through. I mean, that might be over the top for some people, for sure. I think there's some tiny little things you can do, especially one of the things that a lot of people don't appreciate with the cold call is we talked about to start the call, how cold calling is dead, or at least how some people believe cold calling is dead. One of the things that if you listen to that crowd, you miss the number one built-in advantage that cold calls offer. So by these 100 people not cold calling, but these 2 people doing this activity, these people get to take advantage of that built-in inherent advantage of cold calling. And that's the element of surprise.
Okay.
Somebody doesn't know you're calling, they're not prepared for it. If somebody doesn't know you're calling, they don't have their defenses up. If somebody has no idea that you're about to be calling, they don't have a laundry list of objections ready to shoot you down. So some people might say, hey, you know what, I'm a logical buyer, I'm going to prepare my defenses. Well, you can't prepare your defenses if you don't know a call's about to come in.
Sure.
One of the quick examples of what I mean by emotional selling, it's all about how I make you feel based on what I say. So Dave, a minute ago, I gave you a rather lousy start to a cold call. I'll say it again for your listeners because I'm about to do a compare and contrast here. A lousy start to a cold call might be something like this. Good afternoon, Dave. My name is Paul Neuberger, founder of the Cold Call Coach. Just wanted to see if you're happy with your current cold call success rate. That's kind of the cheesy way to start, and I would advise your listeners don't do that. But what I mean by emotional selling is something as little as this. Dave, imagine you pick up the phone. It's an unregistered number. You say, hello, Dave here, and I say something like this. Hey, Dave, Paul Neuberger. How you been?
Yep.
What's the first thought in your head without overthinking? What's the first thought?
Good.
Well, that's your response, but what are you thinking in your head? Hey, Dave, Paul Neuberger. How you been?
I'm going through my mind trying to see who this is calling, right? That's what I would do.
And you and about 99.9% of all other Americans that get a cold call that starts that way. To some degree, that's what I mean by emotional selling.
Sure, okay.
You in a frame of mind. I'm putting you in a certain emotion because at the end of the day, if I just say, hey, Dave, Paul Neuberger, how you been? Paul Neuberger could be anybody.
Sure.
I'm excited to talk to you, happy to talk to you. I didn't have time to provide an in-depth introduction description of who I am. So now you're thinking, Paul Neuberger, who do I know this? But you know what happens a lot of the time, Dave? You're going to have to take my word for it. But what happens a lot of the time is when people pick up the phone, their voice is a little low. Hello? Because this could be anybody, including a salesperson. Hello? Then I say, hey, Dave, Paul Neuberger, how you been? You know how many times they go, hey! Now, I'm dramatizing for training purposes, but the voice always goes up an octave because people respond in kind. That's my emotion wearing off on your emotion. That's what I mean by emotional selling. And if we can teach our clients 5, 6, 7, 10 little tips like that, I don't care if you're a logical engineer or you're as flamboyant as Paul M. Neuberger. There's something in it for everybody, and they're very subtle tricks.
Wow. And that's really good. I mean, I think of the element of surprise, like you said. I think the wall tends to, I know for me, when I look at my phone, if I don't know the number, the wall goes up like instantly. And I'm thinking, okay, do I answer it? Is it a potential client, somebody that I maybe met in another part of the country, and that's why I don't recognize the area code? Or is this, somebody trying to sell me something? There's all these things going on, probably right at the middle. Now, that's a cell phone. I don't think people have the freedom to not answer their, company phone. So do you prefer people call cell phones company phones, or does it really not matter at the end of the day for you?
Yeah, I'll be honest. It doesn't really matter. Any number we can get our hands on, that's a good number.
Sure.
And, one of the other things that we teach with our training is the cold call script is one of 3 scripts that we teach. Now, the cold call script is when you have what I call the person of interest on the line. So let's say I'm like the 1,000 raving fans you have, Dave Melinda. We just want a piece of Dave Melinda. Dave is the POI. That's the person I'm trying to have a conversation with.
Okay.
When he picks up the phone, that now I'm in my cold call script. But there's 2 big impediments to cold call success: voicemails and gatekeepers.
Yep.
Good is a world-class cold call script if you can't get a voicemail return.
Right.
Is a world-class voicemail script if you can't engage the gatekeeper and turn him or her into an advocate on your behalf. Those are 2 of the other scripts that we teach. So when you say cell phone versus business phone, it doesn't really matter, because if we can leave a very powerful voicemail, you will call us back. If it's direct line or general line, it doesn't matter, because if we can turn that gatekeeper into an advocate on our behalf, the message is going to get to you, and it's usually going to end fairly well for us.
Sure.
So the cold call, the voicemail, the gatekeeper, it's all about simplicity and keeping it very, very simple, because rather than having to figure out all these different times to call you, numbers to call you on, if I can leave one extremely engaging message, you are now on my timeline where you're forced to call me, and I end up winning as a result of that.
Wow, that's so cool. So you identified the top 2 killers of most salespeople: voicemail and gatekeeper, right? I mean, that's usually where the gatekeepers got all these skeletons and all these shrunken heads of all these salespeople that just totally bombed right at that spot. Putting you on the spot, if you were to pick one of those and you gave us a couple of tidbits of how, to work on that for ourselves. If I'm a up and coming sales professional and I'm just unsure how to do it, or if I'm the seasoned professional that's kind of my walls up now going, who's this guy? He can't tell me anything until I hear him in action or I literally see something. Which one would you pick? And then if you can help us with a couple of nuggets, that would be a huge, huge help.
It's like asking me to pick between my children, Dave.
Gosh, I know.
I love all my scripts, my babies, so much. I got to pick between one of them. Just shows you how nuts I am about this stuff. What I would say, honestly, is the voicemail. The voicemail is my favorite script. And I think Steve Jobs once said this, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And I think that is very true for the way that we have our clients utilize a voicemail script. And I think of all the ones that you can get really, really good at, it certainly can be made for gatekeeper, because you're going to be talking to them a lot, especially if you're on the B2B side of the house.
Yep.
But with a voicemail, it's evergreen. You need it for B2C, you need it for B2B, and it's my favorite. So a little preface, and then I'll give you 1 or 2 quick tips.
Yeah.
So because I just wrote a book, I've done some research on statistics, and so I could cite them in the book. The average cold call success rate in this country is about 5.5%, depending on what statistics you look at, but it's all pretty similar, about 5.5%. My clients over the course of 6 years have a collective cold call success rate of 36.4%. Not a rounding error. That's statistically significant. I'd say it's even more impressive on the voicemail side. Voicemail response rate, these are harder to come by, but based on some census data, some of these other telemarketing study that was done, you're looking at about 0.7% voicemail response rate. No wonder they tell you not to leave voicemails. 0.7%. Right. That is horrifying.
Yeah.
My clients, as of this conversation you and I are having, are at 23.1% voicemail response rate.
Nice.
How do you do that? A couple quick things. One, I always advocate you be a defensive cold caller rather than an offensive cold caller. An offensive cold caller is what you say. A defensive cold caller is what you don't say. An offensive cold caller is what you put in. A defensive cold caller is what you take out.
Okay.
You should pride yourself on saying very, very little. And in our voicemail, we say next to nothing.
Okay.
Because the more you say, the more likely you are to self-incriminate. The more likely you are to sound salesy. The more likely you are to say something that somebody gets turned off by. So we need to say absolutely next to nothing. Number 2, we make no mention of professional us on the voicemail. All I mean by that is it's like the initial cold call that I gave for you,
Yeah.
Dave. I said, "Hi, Dave. My name is Paul Neuberger, founder of the Cold Call Coach. It is obvious that professional Paul Neuberger is calling. Well, if professional Paul Neuberger is calling, it must be a sales call. When we leave the voicemail, we identify ourselves, of course, but we leave it open-ended where we get them going, is this a personal call? Is this a professional call? We're trying to be as smart as possible
Sure.
to pique that curiosity to say, I want to learn a little bit more about this. Lastly, our voicemails are customized to the classification of POI that we cold call. If we're calling CEOs, we use what's called an attention trigger. We use a specific attention trigger for CEOs, something that taps into their self-interest and self-preservation, where a CEO would say, I think I better call that back because this sounds like this could be important. This sounds like this could be relevant to me. HR directors have a different one. Stay-at-home moms would have a different one for those people that are cold calling them. So it's very scientific, very customized, very defensive laden. And I guarantee you, Dave, if you didn't know what was coming and one of my clients left you a Paul M. Neuberger cold call voicemail, I'm pretty sure you'd call back in a matter of hours.
That's pretty cool. Well, congratulations on the book. That's so cool. What's it called?
It's called The Secrets to Cold Call Success. Everything that I'm sharing with you today, Dave, and your listeners is included in that book.
Okay.
It's on Amazon, and it came out in early June.
Awesome. Well, great. Glad to hear it. So I think about saying less. I mean, you hinted at sales training and, you know, when we train sales professionals here, I'm telling people, you know, listen more and talk less. So when you talk about saying less, you're literally talking about you don't want to leave this long-winded message because the vast majority of people aren't probably going to get to the end anyway, I'm assuming, right? So you're just like, I mean, is it like what you did to me as your revised script? You know, hey, Dave, this is Paul Neuberger. How are you? I mean, can you just demonstrate one for people listening so that we can kind of get a sense of what that sounds like?
Yeah, I probably can't give you an exact example, only because that's obviously how I make my living, and I don't want to give out the voicemail for free. I'm sure you can understand that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but yeah, suffice it to say, it's similar in the sense that, again, all you're trying to do with respect to the cold call and all you're trying to do with the voicemail is two words: pique curiosity. Just interest. Leave them wanting more. And one of the things that I compare the cold call script to, one of the things I certainly think is analogous to the voicemail script, is if you look at pop culture today, what is something that does a very good job of piquing curiosity? It stimulates your interest. It leaves you wanting more. It makes you say, you know what, if I want to see how this ends, if I want to see what this is all about, I got to go do something in response to that. And my answer pre-COVID, more often than not, were movie trailers. Okay. If you go to a movie theater, before the movie starts playing, you've got these 15, 20, sometimes 30 minutes or more. Well, I think movie trailers are one of the greatest things in pop culture in terms of piquing curiosity. Mm-hmm. That's one of the biggest mistakes that cold callers make today, is rather than using the cold call or the voicemail to show the movie trailer, they're showing the entire movie.
Gotcha.
Go back to see the movie if you knew exactly how it ended. Why would you go back to see the movie if you saw every part of the movie?
Sure.
Why would you go back if it left nothing to the imagination?
Yep.
That's the issue with voicemails. People just vomit all over the entire voicemail. Some voicemails are 60 seconds or longer. Yeah. They tell you everything about everything. No curiosity. I know exactly what I would be getting myself into if I called this back. Why should I bother? Why should I call this back? But if you can leave a voicemail that is crazy, crazy short, you give them just enough to tell them what the movie's about, just enough to introduce them to a character or two of the movie, just enough to pique their curiosity to say, hey, if you come back to see this movie, I think you're going to like it. Briefly, here's why. That's like catnip to people. Okay. I think the mark of a very solid voicemail is if you get the person of interest on the other end of the voicemail to say this: I can't afford not to call this back.
Sure.
This could be important. This could be a call I want to take. This could be a conversation worthwhile based on the limited amount of information that was shared. But in no rule book anywhere does it say you have to tell the prospect everything about everything right off the bat. If you do that, they're likely to say, well, it's a sales call. I don't want to call this back.
Right.
There's a better way, a smarter way, and that's the way we teach.
Okay, so without getting into the specifics, because I totally value your time and the fact that you do this for a living, I'm thinking about somebody that says, and I don't know I mean, I'm just making this up, but if I'm trying to sell something that, hey, I want to show you a way that can do this, 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 and this, call me if you're interested. I mean, I get those a lot. I mean, LinkedIn right now is just loaded with, you know, I connect with people and they're right away out of the blocks, you know, selling, they're just selling, right? And it's interesting that what you just said, I mean, I'm just curious if it's like, you know, how I mean, I'm like, now that you're saying this, I'm like 10 words, 20 words. I mean, you're really trying to do a real small amount of verbiage. I was raised sell today and educate tomorrow. And, you know, I think that's where people are educating too much on that call. Is that kind of what you're saying? There's too much information, too much education. We're trying to convince them to call, and that just doesn't seem to work. That's why the numbers are so low. You're 0.7%, you know, people aren't calling back. Is that one of the reasons, because we're educating too much?
To some degree, yeah. And as I said a few minutes ago, we preach defensive calling, not offensive calling. Now, offensive cold calling is a lot sexier, I'll be honest. It's all the things you get to say, the cool talk tracks you have. Here's exactly what I'm going to say to the CEO right now, the stuff I'm going to put in, the information I'm going to share. But again, defensive cold calling, I mean, again, it's almost like if we know that there's one team from the NFC, one team from the AFC, they go to the Super Bowl, somebody's got $700 they want to bet on the game, they fly down to Vegas. The only piece of information I would give that potential individual, it's not what team it is, it's not who the coach is. I just say this. In one conference, you got the NFL's greatest defense. In the other conference, you've got the NFL's greatest offense. Who do you put the $700 on?
Yeah.
That's a subjective question. The answers may vary.
Sure.
I do believe, because I've given this hypothetical example several times, the vast majority of the people answer based on conventional wisdom. I'm going to put the money on the defense. You hear defense wins championships. In baseball, good pitching beats good hitting.
Sure.
Or like defense wins in football, just like defense wins in the military, just like to some degree defense wins in politics, defense wins when you cold call. So when it comes to the voicemail, it's just defense on steroids, and it's ability to try to get them to call back by saying next to nothing. It's roughly 7 or 8 seconds in duration. Okay. And I think the worst thing somebody can do is to do what I call self-incriminate. Now, you normally hear self-incriminate in a legal perspective. So Dave Melenda, which would never happen, Dave Melenda is accused of first-degree murder. I'm his defense attorney, and I say, you know, Dave's a well-spoken, charismatic guy. I'm going to put Dave on the witness stand, and he's going to testify in his own defense. Well, if Dave starts saying stuff that counters what he submitted to the police, if Dave starts countering stuff under cross-examination, versus what he said earlier, the jury of his peers might say he's not a reliable witness. He said this, but he's doing this. He's guilty. Just like you can self-incriminate in a courtroom, you can self-incriminate on the cold call. And all I mean by cold call self-incrimination is this. Based upon what you say and how you said it, the prospect assumes you're a salesperson. It can take 3 seconds to self-incriminate. Me just saying, hi, Dave, my name is Paul Neuberger. Just saying that, Dave, I'm obviously not a friend of Dave, or I wouldn't have said my name is. I'm obviously not a close associate of Dave, or I wouldn't have said my name is. My name is means we've never had a conversation. My name is means you wouldn't recognize me just by the sound of my voice or my name. Let me tell you a little bit more about who I am and what I do. My name is equals sales call. So what we have to do is we have to say virtually nothing, because the more you say, the more likely you are to self-incriminate. And the reason my clients are so successful is we give them nothing to hang us on, nothing that sounds salesy, nothing that is a red flag. Nothing that puts the wall up. And after listening to us and asking us questions, if they don't find anything soft, any squishy underbelly, anything that's problematic, okay, this sounds fine, let's meet. We're very, very good at that. And if there's no hole in the defense, there's no reason to say no.
Wow, that's so cool. So I mean, and I'm thinking as you're talking about preparing for this call, is research involved? I mean, LinkedIn obviously provides a ton of information, a ton of value. Are you requesting, suggesting, asking, demanding people do research so that they know the right way to approach that individual? Or is it just more of a generic approach, and then you get specific as you get to know the person more?
Yeah, it's a bit of a hybrid between the two. I believe excessive research prior to the cold call is a horrible waste of time.
Okay.
I also believe that excessive research before a cold call is an example of avoidance behavior. I can't make the cold call. I don't know enough. I can't make the cold call. I got to research this person a little bit more.
Yep.
Stop making excuses and pick up the phone. Plus, the thing that I would say too, excessive research before you pick up the phone is a waste of time, because the vast majority of the time you're going to get a voicemail. The vast majority of the time you're going to get a gatekeeper. What good is all this research on this person if I can't even talk to this person? I will say, however, that when we work with our clients, before we start building a script, before we start talking about what to say when that person of interest picks up the phone, we do spend time crafting an individualized strategy. The war cold calling is literally won or lost before you ever pick up the phone. All I mean by strategy is really threefold. A, who is your ideal client? Cold calling is not a numbers game. Cold calling is quantity over quality. If you have no idea who you're calling, it is. If you have no idea what to say when somebody picks up the phone, it certainly can be. But rather than saying, okay, I'm going to call Dave Melenda, let me spend an hour researching him. All I'm saying is take a step even further back. What makes up my ideal client? The criteria should be specific, objective, quantifiable, and there's 6 of them. 6 just seems to be the magic number after doing this for so many years. So for instance, what you can't do is you can't inject subjectivity into the process. For instance, I want to call people that are nice. How do you measure nice? How do you quantify nice? Where in the white pages does it say all the nice people hang out? I haven't seen that on LinkedIn either.
Sure.
Or I want to cold call organizations that value my services. How do you quantify that? How do you measure that? So instead of something like that, I want to call an organization that A, has a new CFO who's been in the organization for less than a year. Okay, that's a good one. B, the organization is headquartered in Milwaukee. That's a good one. C, the organization has at least 300 employees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
Specific, objective, quantifiable criteria. You come up with 6 of them. Now you know exactly who you're hunting. Now you know exactly who to go after. Then what I do is I have my clients then do a bunch of research. Research in the sense that which organizations can you find that meet that criteria? It's not overly time consuming because we already put in the hard work. We already put in the difficult tasks. They might come back with 26 organizations. Great. That's all we're going to cold call for the next couple of weeks. It's quality over quantity. Would you want to go out and have a low quantity meal or a low quality meal with your spouse? Would you want to go watch a low quality movie with your crush? No, just for the same reason you wouldn't want to make low quality cold calls. So we have a list of 26. Because these organizations are all similar, because these entities have a lot in common, now we can customize a script that's going to appeal to an organization like that. We may have to change it a little bit because every organization is slightly different. But rather than spending copious amounts of time researching each person, a tremendous amount of time researching each organization, just figure out what profile would any ideal client have, fill in specifics, which individuals and organizations meet that criteria, and then let's build a script around that.
So a follow-up question on the ideal client, because I personally live at about a 6th grade level, Paul. So I think of Mr. Potato Head, and he's my, like, I travel with him and I can, you know, move and pull his eyes out. I can do whatever I want. I can make him my ideal client. You can get very specific on that do you find people that make their client too vague, where if they breathe or if they're a male or if they're whatever, they qualify? Do you really hone down when you're in that who's your ideal client stage? Are you really trying to drill down those 6 pretty deep so that we can, you know, I always ask the question, if there was one person right now that would walk through that door that would make you stop what you're doing and like introduce yourself and want to get to know them, you know, who would that be? And I'm just trying to understand, is there a too vague that you can be on your ideal client versus is there a balance, I guess, is the question that I have.
Yeah, and I think as long as you follow that prescription that I just laid out, 6 criteria.
Yeah.
Anything less than 6, then I think you're going to get too vague, too general. There's going to be too many non-quality entities that are still going to be swept up in the process. But if you have 7, 8, 9, 10 criteria, now you're being a little bit too specific, and we might not find any entities that meet that. Within the 6, however, as long as it's specific, objective, and quantifiable, it's fine. To give you a concrete example, Dave, I created this methodology when I was a financial advisor with Thrive Financial many, many moons ago.
Okay.
Now, I'm cold calling to grow my own practice. I never thought I would teach. I actually, don't take offense, I actually used to look down on people like you and me. It's almost like, well, a consultant, if this guy was so good, why isn't he implementing skill set in his practice and making millions of dollars?
Sure.
I was looking at consultancy wrong. I was looking at trainers wrong. And I see that actually someone like you, Dave, someone like me can touch even more lives now in the role that we're in, which is why I've decided to switch. But when I was with Thrive Financial, I'll give you a specific example to answer your question. This was who I hunted. And I'll give you a very brief explanation why, but I think this will give you an idea of just how granular we get. This was my ideal client when I was with Thrive. And I was in the B2C space. Business to consumer. I wasn't selling to companies. I was selling to individuals. So a little bit different, but this is what I was hunting. I was hunting a male. Now, will I work with a female? Of course I will. Absolutely. I'm not sexist or anything, but I was hunting men primarily because at least the men that I had encountered were more hands-off with their financial plan. That's what I wanted. It was my ideal situation to be working with a client that gave me the freedom to do what I wanted to do. And the women that I knew were a little bit more hands-on. So because of that, I hunted men. Number 2, this guy is between the age of 45 and 60. A, his peak earning years. B, he's accumulated stuff by this point. And C, his time horizon is getting smaller and smaller. He has an urgency to make sure that he has a financial plan in order because he's going to retire a little bit more sooner than somebody who's 23, let's say. Number 3, this male between the ages of 45 and 60 is right smack dab in the middle of a divorce. This is what I call a life event. We teach life events in my training. Life events are the ultimate secret to timing your cold call. It's not, do I call on a Monday or a Thursday? Wrong question. It's not, do I call at 8 a.m. or 1 p.m.? Wrong question. You should call when your ideal client is going through either his or her life event or an organizational life event. In this case, I chose divorce because divorce is very financially traumatic. Important decisions have to be made. And oh, by the way, the urgency tension is very, very high. People usually want to get a divorce over with as quickly as possible. So they've got big decisions to make quickly. Enter a financial advisor. Number 4, this male is going to leave this divorce with at least $1 million in investable assets. Quite frankly, that's going to pay me well. I get more commission because it's a bigger opportunity. Plus, it gives me more options to play with. I can give him more choices because that's a decent amount of money. Last 2. Number 5, this individual resides within 25 miles of my office. Why? Number 1, he's local enough where I can meet with him on a regular basis, get some quality face time, and continue to build the rapport with this relationship. If you ever go through a divorce or know anybody that has, gosh, my friends or her friends and vice versa, that can be a lonely thing, especially if they side with the other person. Mm-hmm. Now, because this person is close, meet with him on a regular basis. Plus, my entire practice doesn't revolve around this guy. I've got other clients to see, and because I don't have to travel far, it allows me to be efficient. Lastly, this client has changed his job at least twice in the last 25 years. primarily, again, for two reasons. Every time you change jobs, that's a 401k that needs to be rolled over. The more jobs he's changed, the more rollover opportunities there are, which are good for me financially. But again, if we've got more money that can be moved, that's more options for him. That is my 6 ideal client criteria. That's who I was hunting. And I got that granular because really all I need to do is write business. Let's say, last thing, let's say the commission on that is it going to be high as a financial advisor, especially what you do with that $1 million bucks? Let's say the commission on that was 30,000 bucks, let's just say. And I write 3. For most individuals, that's a pretty good year. I write 3 pieces of business. I make 90,000 bucks. You could be done for the year. Yeah. Work smarter, not harder, quality over quantity. That's what we teach, and that's what we live.
And that's when you went into that specifics, I'm thinking to myself, that's where your research and investment of time comes in. I'm assuming we had a group of sales professionals. I have a sales advantage roundtable that I run. And one of the guys literally was having to call 250 people a day just to stay, that was a quota. I know, right? It was just like
shivers went down my spine, Dave, just now.
Right? It's just so like, you can't even, I couldn't even begin to identify with this individual, and they were happy. A successful day was when somebody called them back. It wasn't even, no one picked up it was just like, painful, right? So, I get you either invest in shooting in the dark, so to speak, or you invest in that research in identifying for you those 6 criteria. And then at the end, you're going to be way ahead because you know exactly who you're going after. So I really appreciate that. Do you run into a lot of people that are just the shotgun approach where they just are just shooting out there like crazy, and this is like a welcome relief? Is that usually the ideal client for you?
Yeah, well, everybody's shotgunning. I've been running the cold call coach for 5.5 years, Dave. I've never started working with anybody that can describe their ideal client to the level that I want them to. I'll ask, who's your ideal client? And they'll say, well, organizations that have lots of employees. Boy, you're looking at 15.6 million organizations. You're back to quantity over quality. Or again, realtors. Boy, I love realtors. I work with a lot of them, but some realtors really kill me. I want to work with people that are nice. I referenced that earlier. Boy, oh boy, how are you going to find the nice people? Where even to begin there? So just figuring out who do you want to work with. It's figuring out maybe what services or products can you sell that are going to pay you extremely well. What are you happy doing? What are you happy selling? How do you want to work with your clients? And in this case, not a lot of financial advisors want to parachute right into the middle of divorce. I did, because the intangibles that I possess that makes me me is empathy. I'm also a deeply spiritual guy. And I just felt if I can be at my best for people when life is at its worst, that just fills me with a lot of satisfaction. It's not easy. I used to actually go through court hearings with my clients. I never needed to be there. The divorce attorneys would constantly tell me, Paul, you don't need to be here. I wanted to be there, in case a last minute financial question did come up. And sometimes that did, especially if it's contentious, somebody trying to stick it to somebody. Sure. It's nice to have an expert in the room. But more importantly, I just wanted to be there for moral support. So if somebody wants to follow something similar, let's develop an ideal client profile for them. If somebody just says, you know what, I'm not really passionate about my job, which does happen, believe it or not, but I'm passionate about making a lot of money. If I sell this product where it makes sense, I'm going to make the most amount of money. Okay, well, if that's something that you're passionate about and get excited about, let's build a profile, either individually or organizationally, of an entity that would buy that product or service from you and build an entire strategy around that. It's shooting with a sniper rifle rather than a shotgun. And that's why we have so much success, Dave. I'll end on this point. That's why my clients have so much success, because they're taking the time to identify their ideal client. They're taking the time to figure out what makes this person or organization unique. They're picking a life event, which creates an urgent need for their services. And then when we see it, we strike. Just think of that individual that I was talking to you about, that man going through a divorce. He needs me, obviously. He'll pay me well if he elects to work with me. And if this guy who's in his middle ages, who's got a lot to lose, who has a lot of money based on the profile that I walked through, in the middle of this, he's stressed out, he doesn't know what to do. It's right at that moment that he gets a cold call from Paul Neuberger of Thrive in Financial. Am I guaranteed success? No, I'm not, because I still have to sell myself, as I said earlier. I still have to connect with them at an emotive level, as I said earlier. I still have to differentiate myself, as I said earlier. But if I'm calling somebody who obviously has a need for a financial advisor right now, my chance for success goes way up. That's why my clients are so successful, because they're usually calling ideal clients that have a need for them now. They just need to facilitate why they should get the business rather than convincing someone why they should work with them in the first place.
Wow, that's cool. I spend time helping people. I think convincing somebody is really challenging, because if I convince you of something, the next person's going to come along and convince you of something different. So, I try and help people discover, convince versus discover. You discover on your own why this makes sense. You're a lot more likely to be able to, own that. You fight for that. And, when a prospect's fighting for, like if you're calling me and I'm sticking up for my financial guy, I mean, it's pretty much over, right? I mean, there's not much you can do at that point. Is that when you're talking about the rest of the people, you were focused on the, on the success as we come in for a landing here for today. I want to just briefly look at the people that don't call back, or, if I do leave a voicemail, do I leave another voicemail? Do you have any feedback for people? Is it a one and done type thing, getting back to the voicemail thing, or are we kind of approaching this at all these different angles if the first one doesn't work?
Yeah, so what I believe, and this is my theory on life, I just believe once is an anomaly, a random occurrence, twice is a coincidence, thrice is a pattern.
Okay.
Something can be done 3 times. The scientific burden of proof is on your side. That's true. I mean, if you're in a laboratory and you cure cancer once, you cure it twice, you cure it 3 times. Holy cow, Dave Melinda has cured cancer. 3 is the scientific burden of proof. 3 is a pattern. So that's the way that I approach voicemail. So again, our clients have an average voicemail response rate of 23.1%. That is amazing compared to the national average of 0.7. But that means that north of 75% of the voicemails don't get returned. That's still a staggering amount if you think about it. So what I teach my clients, and without getting into all the exhaustive detail, is you need to have what I call proper voicemail protocol. What do I do after that first voicemail? I believe you should call somebody 3 times before you make a decision as to whether or not to move on. If I left you a voicemail once, that's an anomaly. Maybe you got it, maybe you didn't, maybe you accidentally deleted it. I cannot make any kind of decisions or snap judgments on one voicemail. I call you back after a couple days. I'll call you voicemail number 2. That voicemail doesn't get returned. That's a coincidence. Still can't make any scientific judgments. Maybe there's a coincidence, some kind of reason why my 2 voicemails didn't get returned. But if I call Dave Melinda 3 times and my voicemail still doesn't get returned, it's a pattern. Dave Melinda is not interested in returning my call. Dave Melinda, for whatever reason, does not want to speak with me. As a salesperson, you are foolish to continue to keep going to that well after a voicemail has not been returned 3 times in quick succession. So I'm not saying that you forever move off of that prospect. I'm not saying that you forever give up on that opportunity. But why do you want to keep going down that well when that person is clearly not interested? Take some time off, whatever that means for you. Maybe it's a couple weeks, maybe it's a couple months, maybe it's a year or more. I don't know. But rather than continuing to call that person, continuing to sound desperate, continuing to waste your most precious commodity, time, put that person on the shelf, go after some other individuals, and keep cycling through. So after a couple weeks, couple months, you realize, hey, I'm starting over again. Oh, these people, I'm going to take them off the shelf and call them again. But it's basically the 3 strikes and you're out rule. You're not out permanently. You're just out for a short amount of time. And that's just being a better steward of your time. And again, we want to focus on efficiency wherever possible.
That's awesome. And I think, I mean, let's be real, right? How many people call more than once, right? I mean, the guy doing 250 a day, it's always, this was like one of my first questions. I'm like, okay, let's just make the assumption that it's Monday, and you call 250 people and no one calls you back. So Tuesday, do you call a whole new 250? You know, I mean, most people, it's a one and done type thing. So I really appreciate the fact that you're looking at that tenacity to really, number one, you know, it's a personal thing for you, but number two, it does show that person that you are interested in them, you know, trying to get in contact with them. I'm glad you didn't say, yeah, you know, if you don't, after the third time, drive to their house and stalk them, you know, that would have been a little awkward, right?
Well, and the last thing I'll end on, because I know you want to wrap us up here in a second, but the other thing is too, and I won't get into the granular details, but every time you call back, your script needs to sound a little bit different, really for two reasons. One, your script needs to sound different because if you call the same person back 3 times and your script sounds exactly the same,
Yeah.
now you sound like RoboCop. You sound like some kind of automatron, and we don't want that.
Right.
If it's the same message every time, there's no diversity, there's nothing new, there's really nothing to show that, that there's really a lot of reason to call you back. It's just the same person giving me the same message. So not only should the message change each time, it should change strategically to slowly ratchet up the urgency. And there's ways that we do that. We create a decent amount of urgency in call number 1. But based on the word choice that we choose in call number 2, the script is a little bit different, but we ratchet up the urgency even more. Call number 3, which is going to be our final call before we put them on the shelf for a little while, the script is slightly different, but then we're all in with creating some additional urgency because we know, hey, if this guy doesn't call us back, if this lady doesn't call us back, we're walking away for a little bit.
Sure.
So again, if anybody wants some additional information on how they do that, they can always contact me. It's not just a matter of calling back 3 times. The script has to be slightly different, and it's got to ratchet up the urgency. Otherwise, you're going to be the hamster in the wheel, and you're just wasting everybody's time.
Wow, that is great stuff. Thank you for sharing that. So a couple quick questions for you. What would Paul Neuberger's tip of the week be for the audience listening?
I probably already said it, but I think it's repeating that people buy people first. And in every situation where you're selling, before anybody's going to buy your company, before anybody's going to buy your product, before anybody's going to buy your service, they first have to buy you. Now, there's an art form to selling yourself. It's not just, hi, Dave, my name is Paul Neuberger. I like long walks on the beach. I'm a Sagittarius, and tacos are my favorite. I mean, that's creepy. You're not going to sell that way. But before you can ask anybody to buy from you, you first have to sell yourself as a person. Once you sell yourself as a person, you have the keys to the kingdom, and all of the opportunities are directly in front of you.
Awesome. Hey, you had me at tacos, so that's.
Well, I'm glad you said that, Dave, and not long walks on the beach.
Yeah, yeah. Kind of awkward, although I've done them, but not with you today. Sorry, it's kind of cold out, so we'll leave it at that. So one last question, I'm going to let you go. If you feel comfortable, what's one thing that most people don't know about you that you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, and I'm very open and transparent. In fact, I like the ability to be open and honest, so I appreciate the question.
Yeah.
When I was at Thrivent, I was on the brink of bankruptcy, to be honest, and I learned a very valuable lesson in that regard. Basically, I'm not arrogant, but I'm about as self-confident and self-assured as an individual will ever be. And that's because, again, my faith in God. Doesn't make mistakes. He makes everybody perfectly, and not perfect, but he makes them perfectly, and I'm made perfectly. So I don't have any hang-ups or whatever else. So I know that I'm built the way that I was supposed to be. But that got me in trouble when I was with Thrivent, because I thought there was no business I can't close. There is no revenue I can't generate. There is no client that's off limits to me. I'm going to set the world on fire. So I spent as if I had already arrived. I got a gigantic office in Grafton, Wisconsin, and all I had was one administrative assistant at the time. It had like 7 offices. I figured I'd grow into it. That lease payment a month was huge. I then started to staff up. I went from 1 administrative assistant to 2.5 administrative assistants, plus a summer intern. Plus I did some revenue shares with people. Basically, I was one of the top producers for Thrivent Financial. But even if I gross $10,000 a month, which for some people is a phenomenal month, my expenses might be $16,500 a month. I kept falling behind until it got to the point where I just couldn't keep it up. I missed payroll once or twice. I regrettably walked out on that lease. I made an arrangement with the owner of the building. He was a very generous man, and I really appreciate what he did for me then. And that taught me a very valuable lesson is you got to surround yourself with people that know you. Surround yourself with people that have been through this. You're not perfect, and you shouldn't think that you're going to accomplish everything that you set out in life. Life throws you curveballs. Life brings challenges, and I don't care how bad you want it. I don't care how intense your desire is. Your desire does not always equal success. It's a part of it for sure, but you need more stuff than just desire. I talked to probably 15 people, Dave, before I leased a 30-year lease, by the way, before I leased that building in Grafton. Of the 15, including my wife, including my parents, including my boss at Thrivent at the time, not a single one said it was a good idea. And I did it anyway.
Sure.
It was, what was that? That's probably 7 years ago, 6 years ago. About a year ago, I finally got out of the hole that I dug for myself. I'm debt-free now. Life is great. I'm blessed beyond measure, to say the least. But being a week away from bankruptcy and seeing what that can do to your family,
sure,
woke me up. Now I'm a smarter version of me. I'm a less impulsive version of me. I surround myself with the smartest people in the world, and I actually listen to them when they give me advice. And because of that, I own 4 businesses, all of which are thriving. But if I never had that done for me, not to me, some people might say, gosh, why is this happening to me? Why is this negative stuff happening to me and my family? None of that happened to me. It happened for me. And because I learned from it, because I picked myself back up, and because I never made that mistake again, I'm a better version of myself because of that.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, I think that what came to my mind in that was King Solomon said, in the multitude of counselors is safety. And that's one of the reasons that I coach is I don't want people to feel like they're out there having to do this on their own. So when, somebody is coming alongside somebody else, what a great investment, where you're investing yourself into somebody else's for whatever reason, maybe what financial, personal, whatever the reason is, between you and yourself. But I appreciate you sharing that. And, if there's somebody listening that's struggling financially, struggling with that, that's why Paul's here. That's why I'm here. We're here to help. So if somebody did want to get in contact with you, Paul, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. So I would say the central repository for everything that I am, everything that I offer, everything that I do is my website. And it's just very simple, paulmneuberger.com. My email address, again, pretty straightforward, paul@paulmneuberger.com, whether it be cold call coaching, whether it be LinkedIn coaching. I've got a program called Why Development Training to really take on what Simon Sinek taught, how to find your why and really kind of articulate your why. I just launched a new training program that we're very excited about. It's called Excellence in Business Acumen, how to close business faster by leaving a favorable first impression in that first meeting, or you're looking for a keynote speaker, whatever the case may be. Would love to talk to you and would appreciate you checking us out and learning more about what we do.
Awesome. There must be another Paul Neuberger that you had to put the Paul M. Neuberger in. So I'm assuming that's the reason for the M.
Actually, no, I don't begrudge you for thinking that, because most people probably would. My father is my hero. Okay. And my father's name is Michael, and my middle name is Michael. And it's an ongoing tribute to my father, whom I love more than life itself. I want everyone to know that I'm my father's son. So that's with Paul M. Neuberger.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you, Paul, so much for hanging out with us. This time just flew by. So again, if you're listening and you want to pick up a copy of Paul's book, or you want to reach out to him at paulmneuberger.com, and please feel free to check him out. Connect with him on LinkedIn. And again, if there's anything that I can do, be more than happy to help. So with that, thanks, Paul, so much for all this wisdom. I wrote down a ton of notes. Looking forward to implementing that. And hopefully we'll see you out on a stage somewhere soon.
Absolutely. Any chance I get to share a stage with Dave Melenda? That's certainly something I want to take advantage of. I appreciate it, brother.
Here we go. Well, good to see you. We'll talk soon.
All right, man. Thank you.
Thanks.